Merkel Media.
What's good, guys? We are back with another episode of Free the Rabbits, and you'll notice there was no intro music this time because we're cutting straight to the chase. We're going to talk about this mysterious UFO meeting with pastors with supposed government officials, which, by the way, I was a part of. And what's interesting about this whole thing is that I was getting blown up earlier in the day when it started surfacing on social media. And I thought it was a separate meeting because they kept saying government officials. And I noticed all the pastors that were involved. And I said, yeah, I was at a meeting with these guys, but it wasn't government officials. And come to find out, it was the same meeting. And just like anything goes here in the conspiratorial world and truther community, everything spirals out of control without people actually having the facts of what happened, what was said, what was going on. So I talked to Tony, who's a great friend of mine, and he and I were both at the meeting. And I suggested that he come on my show, which, by the way, is the first time you're on my show, which is shocking because I've been on your show a jillion times. But I brought you on the show so you and I can talk about our experience. But I kind of want to start off with how this all evolved into the meeting, you inviting me there, and then we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of what was presented at the meeting, because I have a lot of thoughts about that. And as you'll talk about, I was probably one of the most vocal people when there were people that were asking questions and, directing things towards the person that was presenting it into why we're here. You know what I mean? So I'll kind of let you kind of open the floor with kind of how we even got to the meeting.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show, man. And I will say that I've been on an apology tour to all my friends who I invited to the meeting. And so publicly, I'll just say, I'm sorry I invited you if you have regrets. I don't have regrets, but if you have regrets, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't have the foresight to see the firestorm that was going to come. But there's a lot of weird things that led to what has happened this week, making this apparently a national news story. And the way this unfolded, it wasn't something that happened fast and quickly. I was connected with these guys. So I guess to start, I would just want to jump forward to jump backwards. I was in two meetings, and the first one I was invited to. The second one I organized, which is the one that you were in, and my pastor friends that have been getting blown up on social media and things like that. So about a year and a half ago or whatever, I was at a media conference, and I found myself in a circle of guys who were just talking about the different things they do for a living and their past and all that. And actually, there's a guy asking me essentially to join him on this journey overseas. Like, anybody who knows me, I've only left the country one time. I skipped across the border into Canada for Niagara Falls, and I came right back 7 days later. I have never left the country outside of that. I am so uncultured, so untraveled. And he's like, well, listen, because basically he caught wind of what I do with like media, and he wanted me and him and one other person and a contact that he has in another country to sneak the three of us across the border of the country to document and film a documentary on ancient biblical sites in this country that you would have to sneak in. And I was like, every guy bone in me, you know me, we've gone on journeys together. I was like, yes. And then like in the back of my head, I was like, my wife is never going to let this happen. And so I'm in this circle of these guys talking, and this one guy, he catches wind of what I do. And he just said something like, hey, let's keep in touch. Let's connect. And we exchanged information. He then informs me at some point what he kind of is involved in, and he wanted to arrange a call with me to inform me on data and information that they have accumulated, him and his group. And so I did, and there was like 2 or 3 guys on the call. I always feel like there's 3 guys, but if there was, the third guy I have only ever talked to one time, which was on the phone. Um, and and they laid out information to me of what they've gathered as far as data and intel on coming disclosure, what the UAP phenomenon is, and they and this was all according to their research, their connections, their networking. They have traveled, I don't know how far. They have really done a lot of work in rubbing elbows and shoulders with people who are in the know with disclosure, intimately involved, and they have come to their own conclusion that a lot of this stuff that people are seeing in the skies are man's creation. In fact, they use the percentage 90% of what we see in the sky is man-made. My personal belief, or let me just go to this 10%, the other 10%, they believe is fallen angel technology originating from another plane of existence. In my language, and what I would say would be manifestations from the second heaven. And they tell me this, and that it was probably like an hour phone call, I'd imagine, but that detail is the detail that stuck out to me over this last year and a half, because it just what they were saying to me was nothing that I had not already thought about, considered, or believed. I had already believed that this stuff was already in this vein, but they were confirming my suspicions based on their research and data collection. And so that started me talking with these guys, and just they were just informing me on things here and there, and nothing groundbreaking. As far as my own personal opinion on things, they would shoot me text messages or calls, and just give me perspective as what they understand things to be as things would hit news cycles and things like that. So as the year goes on, people that follow me know my wife last year was diagnosed with cancer. And so as the year went on from April, I think it was April last year, I got more and more stressed out with just life, and I cut these guys off. And they're not the only ones. I cut a lot of people out because, and to this day, I have a lot of people cut out just because it's not personal. I just don't have time, and it's I didn't have the energy to keep up with everything. And so these guys made the cut list, and I shelved it. I was like, I don't have time to be taking these phone calls, and just it was giving me anxiety. Everything was, though, and so I just had to cut stuff out. So this year and I hope this isn't getting too long for you, Joel. I'm sorry, but
No, and I wanted to jump in real quick.
Please.
That I was very aware of your interactions with these guys the whole time. I remember many times where you would call me and ask me, what do you think about this? Like, what do you actually think about what they're saying here? Because here's the reality of it. You and I are very aware that there are people who are on the outside who could be connected to government operations or any sort of black ops operations that would try to use people in this space to get information out that they want released to the public. And I think you and I are very aware of the fact that anything could be that. This could be that, right? We are very aware, and we want to be cognizant of that and not just take anyone's word on it. And
Right.
I think that's why you and I were constantly having those conversations about this. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to bring up early on, because the reality is that you and I try to be upfront and honest with everyone who listens to us. You might not like everything we have to say. You might not agree with it, but at least we try to be forthcoming. And even with this, we're trying to be very forthcoming, and we're trying to look at this legitimately and give you legitimate information as far as we know. And this is a point of conversation that you have had with me over the past year and a half or whatever about these guys, because we talked about that. Now, as it funneled into a couple of meetings, obviously that was coming directly to you, but I knew about the conversations you were already having with them prior to this. This is just the evolution into the actual meetings.
Right. And, I guess this would be a good time to also add this piece because I think I might have missed a detail here. Early on, right away, I knew I was talking to guys who were telling me that they were Christians. And early on in my communications with them, the I would say almost like repeated phraseology in conversations was always, we can't get lost in the weeds on the details. We need to focus on pointing people to Christ through an era of our culture that is going to be filled with confusion. Their heart was always that it was there. I don't want to say they were fearful, but they were very concerned about the future of the American church. I'd say for not maybe for everybody, not the pastor, or maybe some pastors, but not necessarily the pastors, but maybe the lukewarm Christians that don't really have theological perspective and just understanding in general what's going to happen to them if they have a paradigm shifting thing and information coming out, and the leaders of their church are not prepared to talk about such topics. And there's a lot of churches like that. And so that was that was a motivation behind everything that they've shared and talked to me about. And so anyways, long story short, I really felt compelled this year to reach back out to them and just touch base. And quickly, I'm on a phone call, and on the second phone call, I had to call him back because I had to go do something. On the second phone call, he just told me, he said, "Hey, listen, I'm hosting a meeting with pastors, and I would love if you could make it. And it's an information meeting, just kind of sharing our data and research. And if you have any pastor friends that you think would benefit from this and would be open to hearing this," he said, "I trust you and you can invite them." I said, "Anybody?" And he said, "Anybody. I trust you." And so I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I invited friends, and only one friend showed up, and we weren't the only ones there. There were other pastors. I don't know their names. I don't know who they are. They were local pastors, I assume. And we go through this meeting, and I would say it was two-parter with loose connections between the two subjects. One, they open up with a very long meeting on the reality of human trafficking and where it's happening at, and the reality of that in the world, which I'm very open to exposing. Clearly, I've done that a lot over the last couple of years, and then the second half was them sharing their data, research, and their beliefs as to what's happening and what's going on. And that first meeting, I felt good walking out. I felt like the vibes were good, and information was given to pastors that can then just be better equipped to tackle the coming days that are coming and with their congregation. And then a few weeks later, I was going to be at the NRB, National Religious Broadcasting Conference. And that is where a lot of my pastor friends were going to be. I reached out and I said, if I can get my friends over to an Airbnb for a meeting, would you like to host another meeting, an information meeting for these guys? And they said, yeah. And so I invited lots of my friends, and I called you up too. I knew you weren't a pastor, but I was like, pastor-ish. I was like, listen, if I'm in these meetings, Joel can be in these meetings,
right?
And so I invited you, and one of the reasons why I invited you is because I know you have intimate knowledge on some of the things that are not talked about a whole lot in this field. There's a big focus on what is it, right? And a lot of people go into the physical side, aliens coming from other planets and in their craft, and they're here studying us, to wanting to enlighten us. They seeded us, all that stuff. But there's a real, from my perspective, and I know not obviously not everybody agrees with me. I think that there is a very dark angle to this that gets glossed over at times, a lot of times, and I know you feel the same way, and you've studied a lot about the history of the occult, and I knew that these topics, at least loosely, are being presented in the meeting. And so I was like, Joel should be here. I also want Joel's perspective. And I told you, I'm pretty sure I told you beforehand. I was like, ask any questions you want, and don't feel like you have to guard yourself. This he's a big boy. He can handle it.
I feel like I unguarded myself a lot because I told you afterwards, I said, well, I kind of cut loose and, hopefully, I didn't overtake the meeting at times and, made him feel any kind of way. And then you told me later that no, he's perfectly fine with that and he'd prefer it that way specifically because people are engaging. And to be honest with you, and we'll discover today that he talked a whole lot more about the occult than I thought he was going to talk about originally. And he was connecting these pieces of the occult in with these governmental operations, which I've literally been screaming from the rooftops for years. And it's this piece, and I call it you got the 1/3, you got the 1/3 that's missing of the puzzle that people just constantly toss out. People will look at the spiritual and they'll look at the physical, but they miss this occulted knowledge that is a part of all of it and is very connected to these government operations. So I was a little excited, obviously, when he started bringing this stuff up, but then I was definitely asking a lot of very pointed questions and say, well, why this, why that? Why are you bringing this up? Why is this connected to this? And I think that was my biggest takeaway from it was his ability to look at it as a whole and say, look, I'm not saying they're all demons, because he did say that. He did bring that up. I believe he used the analogy of the elephant. People see the front end of the elephant. Some people see the back end of the elephant. Some people see the middle of the elephant, but nobody sees the whole thing because it's too big. And I think that's where I'm at with it too. And for anybody that's just joining me now, go check out my episode, Aliens or Demons, where I go into it in depth of what I think is going on here, because I don't think that it's an easy yes or no question. I think it's a very complex question when we're looking at the spiritual world and what's going on in these other realms. It's just not that easy. And I know everybody wants to argue about what it is, which we're not going to do today, but everybody wants to argue about what it is. But the issue is that it is very complex. And that's the thing that I took away from it too. He never tried to steer us in a direction of think this. Right. No, here's information. Here's where we're at with it currently. He wasn't even giving us timelines and dates. He said this could happen at this particular time. And that's one of the things that I've seen over the past few days that's kind of gotten out of control is people talking about, well, they said this was going to happen here or this was going to happen here. They never said that. They gave us loose time frames where things could happen. But the one thing I also took away from it was these are very, very highly operative operations that can move fluidly with what's going on around them. So if the public's moving one way or they feel like people are becoming hip to this idea, they'll shift. So the ideas of this is going to happen on this time frame or this is going to happen on this time frame, it's just not possible. And he made that very clear too. So I think that's what let me at least feel like that, okay, I can take on board more of what this guy's saying, albeit I'm still skeptical because I'm always going to be skeptical in these situations. But I think for me there wasn't anything definitive given out of it outside of just information dumping is basically what it was. It was a meeting of, hey, let me dump this information into people who really don't know a lot about this kind of stuff outside of the handful like you, me, and a few others there that have been studying and looking into this stuff for years.
Yeah, and I think even there's a motive where it was like they probably don't even care how much a pastor knows or doesn't know about it. It, like, say a pastor, like for instance, Alan Didio was there, and he wrote a book called Summoning the Demon, talking about a lot of this stuff. So Alan, from Alan's perspective, is pretty well educated from a biblical perspective of what he believes this stuff is, and that was fine. The point of this whole thing was to get the sparking in pastors' brains that this is coming. This is no longer Alan's book. This is no longer a theory. This is something that, from their data and intelligence that they've gathered as a private group of Christians doing intelligence operations. I want to make that specifically clear. Their intelligence gathering and data that they've had and gathered shows them that disclosure is coming. And as we record this, Joel, just today, war.gov/UFO goes live and active, and they start dropping their first things. And, you know, these guys, their motive, and their motive was for the spiritual side of things. They want people to not walk away from their faith in Jesus. They want people to walk into faith with Jesus. And I believe personally that this disclosure stuff is a great opportunity for people to consider for the first time in their life where they stand with Jesus. I think that as a Christian who is an evangelist at heart, I feel like this is a very evangelistic opportunity for people to come into the grace, the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And I know these guys agree with me, and that this was the whole motivating factor. And everything's getting lost in the way. They're like, but tell us about the reptilians. I'm like, how about I tell you about Jesus? Does that sound good?
Right.
And so, like, on this website, war.gov/UFO, I literally, it popped up maybe an hour before we connected. There's a fake picture, a rendering, and I'm not saying it's fake, like, oh, I found it, it's fake, and they're trying to say it's real. No, they say this is a rendering graphic overlay depicting eyewitness reports from September of 2023, and it shows an oval disc ish. It looks like almost like a football shape, and there's a flash of light showing this thing coming out of a flash of light. And in the description, it says that it was that there were multiple. All right, so apparent bronze metallic object materializing out of a bright light in the sky, and it says here that there were. It's depicting this because there were corroborating eyewitness reports from September 2023. So the government investigated, and this is all I know just from this picture. I haven't looked into it, but it seems to me that the government thought enough of a report of multiple eyewitnesses saying that they saw a bronze metallic disc craft thing coming out of a flash of light to go investigate it, and then include it in the first initial drop of this disclosure stuff. And so I don't know the story behind it. Maybe there's a story that just totally blows everything I just said out of the water. But just from looking at it from the surface, it looks like within our own government, they're giving a head nod to the idea that it's worth investigating something that seems to be manifesting from another realm and dimension. That's how I interpret it. But I have different perspectives on things that maybe other people wouldn't interpret that way.
Yeah, completely. And, you know, I looked into the site and I haven't had a chance to really go through it thoroughly, but there's 162 files up as of this recording, and they do have renderings. Some of them are some real pictures from before that we've obviously seen already, but it actually starts off with a True Social post by Donald Trump talking about all the tremendous interest that's been shown in UFOs and this idea of disclosure. So again, this meeting that we had, the last meeting that we had, suggested that this was going to ramp up. What's also interesting was the guy that told us about all this stuff coming down the pipe from the government, he actually mentioned to us that Donald Trump would soon be coming out with something. He didn't give us a date or anything. An hour later, Donald Trump posted on True Social that in response to everyone's interest in this, that he would be pushing the DOJ and several other departments to release this information. So I found that, eyebrow raising that we just heard this in the meeting. An hour later, Donald Trump posts this. And I'm not saying necessarily the two were correlated, but it was weird.
Yeah.
And it just seems like that we are on the cusp of some sort of revelation that's coming. Now, I'll give some thoughts about what I think that people are spinning the meeting to be towards the end of this, because I think that's also important too for the Christian to understand, and how that a lot of this can be reversed back on us to, I think, take away the spiritual element of everything that's going on. But continue with how we kind of got there, and then we can go into the actual information that was given.
Yeah, I mean, we can put a bow on it, really. I mean, it's just, so we have this meeting in Tennessee, and it's the second one I was in. It was the first one that you were in, and my pastor friends were in outside of one. And I walked out. Well, I didn't walk out of the meeting. You guys walked out of the meeting. I stayed at my Airbnb. But that meeting ended, and I felt good about it. I felt like, not that I was doing the kingdom's work, but I felt like I was being helpful. I felt like I was looping in friends that I love into an understanding that because we all come from different perspectives. Like, they're pastors, and I'm just kind of surprised they even like me. And like I was able. It was an opportunity for me to loop them into a little bit of my world, and seeing their reaction of, like, okay, this is serious. Like, disclosure is going to happen, and we need to be even more so locked in on Christ. That was so encouraging for me, and maybe that's why I'm so emotional about it. Seeing the backlash of everything this week and stuff, because it's just like, that wasn't the heart behind the meeting,
Right.
And so, the meeting happened, and that's that. I mean, that's how it came together.
Right. And I'm going to start shifting into some of the information that was given there. And then obviously I'll be asking your thoughts on some of the stuff that he presented. Before we even get started with that, I want to clear up one particular piece of information that I believe has absolutely gone out of control. And I know Perry Stone was the first one to report on it. He wasn't there at the meeting, but he had talked to someone who was. And I know that.
Let me just say one thing with that. I don't have any information on this, but I personally believe that whatever Perry Stone was talking about was a completely, I believe there was a completely different meeting that happened somewhere else with different people. And I can't speak to what was or what was not said at this meeting. All I can say is, whatever Perry was talking about, we got looped into because of the references we've made on different platforms. And so I just wanted to say that, because I think I know where you're going. And I don't know if there was other meetings. I tend to feel like it seems like it, because what was said by Perry doesn't sound like my meetings at all. So go ahead.
Right. And just to clear that up, so if it was a separate meeting, that's fine. But for people that know about this particular meeting that Joe Rogan was obviously talking about, because he talked about Alan yesterday, I believe it was, and this idea of reptilians. And I can tell you verbatim, 100%, reptilians were not brought up as a part of this meeting at all. Shapeshifters, none of that. We talked about some weird stuff, but it was not reptilians and it was not shapeshifters. That wasn't a part of the equation whatsoever. And I know people have run with it, and now it's become this whole meeting about reptilians and reptilians integrating within the government. And no, it wasn't. Now,
how exciting would that be?
I mean, listen, I would have been more than happy to talk about it if it was the case, but it absolutely was not the case. We were not talking about reptilians. Again, we're going to go through some of the stuff today. Like, there's definitely some very interesting information. And honestly, back to, it wasn't really anything new that you and I haven't talked about already. So we'll kind of get into some of the early parts.
Can I just say one thing too?
Yeah, go ahead.
Joel, before you get into the early parts, I remember specifically in both meetings, I was being introverted and analyzing who I am and what I think about things and being guarded with the men giving this briefing because I was like, these guys are tiptoeing around my world, but I don't think they understand how weird I am about this. Like,
right.
I was pulling me back because I was like, I don't know if I can show my total freak flag on this. Like, I don't care what room I'm in. I'm pretty sure I'm one of the most weirdest ones in the group because I have nearly a decade of talking to people who have through their experiences that some, not all, in fact, majority, I can't say this to be true, but some of the most crazy stories that I've uncovered, I was able to pull the thread at and actually, in my mind, prove that it is actually happening and real. And I don't even know how to convey that to people that I view as normal. And these guys were a little too normal for me. So I was just like, I'm a little weird. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good completely because I get it. And I think I was way more vocal in that meeting than I thought I was going to be. I felt like I was going to be way more reserved like you were and just taking the information. But I remember the trigger point for me was he started talking about Aleister Crowley and Lamb. And then it just went, I don't know what happened after that. I was just engaging with him thoroughly throughout the rest of the time because he, hit a trigger for me. He brought in the occult world. But to even get to that, the initial part of the presentation, because he did a presentation, and what he started with, which I know he went into more thoroughly during your first meeting, which I was not a part of, but he did talk about it here, was the trafficking, specifically the trafficking of children. And he talked about organ trafficking. He talked about sex trafficking. And he talked about psionics trafficking. Now, to lead up to this meeting we had today, I actually went back and listened to that Michael Herrera episode with Sean Ryan. And I wanted to get the gist of what he said about what happened to him. And one of the things that I realized from that whole interview was he never actually saw people being trafficked into this ship. What happened was when he got roped into all these proceedings through Stephen Greer, he met a guy who was a scientist who was working in those departments. And there was tubing that he saw going into these 8x, I think he said 6 or 8x8 boxes. And he didn't know what they were. And the scientist told him, well, that was to pump oxygen and whatever else into these boxes where these people were being trafficked. So I think at that point he realized that, it wasn't drugs. It wasn't some other illegal things like weapons or anything like that, which he originally thought for years. So that's where Michael Herrera got this idea of it being people, which makes a lot of sense now that he talked to the scientist who's also a part of these whistleblower proceedings. But it ties right directly into all of this trafficking. And what's interesting too, one of the terms that the guy who was giving the information to us brought up was a Greek term called pneumatica porneus. And pneumatica porneus also ties into the word corn for the YouTube people to understand what that means. But basically, it means spiritual prostitution or spiritual immorality, but it could also mean, and I thought this was interesting, spiritual or metaphorical whoring after other gods or idols, which we'll find here specifically when we find these connections to these ancient gods, because he talks about actual connections that these groups who are bringing these children, specifically the ones for psionics, and we'll talk a little bit about Jake Barber today, but specifically these kids for psionics to these entities. And he is talking about how that it is all being roped into these ancient Mesopotamian gods and these deities. And I thought that was fascinating. And I know you and I've talked about it a lot, but I would love to hear your thoughts now on it and what you were thinking when he brought that up, because that's interesting for that to be tied also into these government operations.
Yeah. I honestly, that word, I'm surprised you remember, because I was like, Parnea, what? But I guess I walked away from that portion more distressed. I mean, that might be the most distressing part of this whole thing, was the human trafficking side of it. It's not often talked about, and it's not often thought about for me, at least up to that point. It's just something that falls in the back of your brain. And knowing that the stats, and I've known the stat for years now, and I think it needs more attention, to be honest with you. I think it's on average 420 million or 420,000 children a year go missing in the United States alone. And I think the United States is the largest, leading the charge on missing children. And when you hear that stat and you think about what you just talked about, it's very concerning. I don't think that 420,000 children are all being abducted and trafficked by these nefarious organizations, but it is very concerning to know that there is any percentage of children going missing, let alone into either psionic trafficking, human trafficking for sex slavery, or organ harvesting. And if organ harvesting sounds ridiculous, it's not. And I've covered that on my show years ago. I think it was like episode 200 something. It was a long time ago. I talked to a guy who was actively exposing organ harvesting out of China. And he talks about the Uyghur Muslims in China and how they're in concentration camps. Nobody talks about it. Nobody cares about it. And his accusation was that these people are being harvested. Their organs are being harvested. And some of these people are not put to sleep. They're not killed for a fresh organ harvest. They're kept alive and awake to be harvested. And to take that information that I had years ago and then think about a little child going through such a thing because they were abducted or however they were acquired, and they didn't meet the psionics qualification. They didn't meet the physical looks qualification. So they were rendered to being harvested. Like that's a disgusting thing that is happening in this world. And, we talk about this stuff. We talk about Epstein and all that. That this is the reality is there is absolute suffering in this world of the innocent because of people who, in my mind, are 100% controlled by demonic forces. This is a deep, dark spiritual war, and I don't need to tell you that. I know you've studied it and you understand the spiritual implications behind this. There is a dark ruling authority and power operating in this world, and we're starting to see some serious glimpses of it through this kind of intel coming out.
Yeah, and it kind of moves us to the next piece that he was talking to us about. And you brought up Epstein, and he is actually relevant here, but he starts talking about babies and children, and they're actually frozen and sent dead to these elites for all kind of ritualistic practices. And he said this is through the direction of these entities and these Mesopotamian gods. And we can look at Moloch and Baal, and I'm sure we'll talk about them here in a second, because he specifically talks about two of them that the government is working with, at least these shadow governments are working with. But he also talked about something else, which really raised some red flags to me, these NGOs, and they were moving children through the U.S. by major businesses. So these non-governmental organizations are essentially covertly trafficking children. And you know what it made me think about, Tony, was Wayfair and all of that wild stuff that went down with Wayfair, which I don't know if you know, But a lot of interesting things came out recently about Wayfair as well. And I was actually, shocked at the fact that during the Epstein files, their Wayfair was mentioned 400 times in the Epstein files. And there was an actual email to one of Epstein's assistants where he sends a payment of over $8,000 to a Karna Shuliak. And it's very in line with the price tag that was going for some of these armoires and dressers and shoes and things that were being talked about through Wayfair. And this is exactly it. Non-governmental organizations moving children through the US, through major businesses. And it really made me think about that and the fact that this is probably happening way more than we think. And if we have these major billionaires who run these corporations who are also involved with this, they're using legitimate companies as a cover to be able to traffic children. Tony, there's no way that over 500,000 children go missing just in the U.S. alone every year without there being some sort of government operation in cahoots with some of these other organizations to make it happen.
Yeah, I had not heard about that. I'm trying to, I was just looking around to see if I could find it real quick because I was like, I had not heard about that. And that is, I totally forgot about the Wayfair stuff from, what was that, like 2021, something like that, and those thoughts, maybe conspiracies back then. But I had no idea that there was a correlation to the Epstein files and what was in there. Is this a widely known thing, or did you recently kind of find this?
It was going around with the Epstein files. I actually, which I'll show on the screen when I was talking about it, the actual Epstein file of the email between he and his assistant, so people can see it on the screen. But yeah, it was going around during that period of time, and it just resurfaced the whole Wayfair conspiracy again. Now, just for fun, I asked Google AI, and of course they said, "Oh, this is just unfounded and it's not real." And it's like, no, it's literally in the Epstein files. You can find it everywhere. So no, it's definitely there. And when he brought that up, that's immediately where my mind went. And just because it was so prevalent in the Epstein files too, I said, this is just one example of what about all these other things and these other companies that we don't know about that's operating with the same type of impunity with governments.
Yeah. It kind of, it does put things in perspective. And I'm never somebody who says that, I don't think that the frontline people that we recognize in our government are the ones that are hands-on doing this stuff.
Yeah.
It's layered. It's people who've been there a long time, probably longer than the people that we recognize. And hearing you talk about this kind of just throwing me for a loop, because I'm now thinking about like the implications of that and where that goes. And I kind of want to just, I'm going to disconnect from you right now, and I'm just going to go bye-bye. I'm going to go look into it because I don't know what to say to that. That was a curveball. I'm really stunned by that. Wow.
Yeah. And, he moves kind of fluidly throughout this presentation, and he brings up the idea that Trump is the mirror image of Nebuchadnezzar II. He brings up this parallel, right? And I want you to tell people here, what was the thing that he said is in Trump's future that Trump will be putting out with he and Melania on it? And again, this might not happen, guys, but this is what was told to us at this meeting that they would be putting out. And this is going to tie into something really weird here too, because when you brought up the Nebuchadnezzar thing, it brought this crazy connection where, oh man, maybe he is trying to be kind of like the new Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. So I'll preface it with saying that I feel like their connections and the information they gather is maybe one step before everybody finds out about it at times. Like you were talking about the different dates and things like that. And, that's all part of intel gathering. And you gather information and you let it play out and see what manifests from there. And that goes into what you're bringing up, because he said that from their intel and their data, what they've received, that there will be a commemorative coin coming out with Trump and Melania on it. And distinctly, or maybe not distinctly, I'm not sure how it's going to actually look, but there will be some type of a UFO behind them on the coin. And I think the idea behind that is that I don't think it'd probably be a surprise for a whole lot of people, but Trump wants to be known as maybe the disclosure president, but maybe he more accurately wants to just be known as the everything president. I think Trump wants to have his hand on everything, and he wants to be known as the best on everything. And so it's like, if it exists, I did it. So
absolutely. Yeah. And when he said the Nebuchadnezzar correlation to Trump, and when he said the coin, it really made me think of another man who fashioned himself to be Nebuchadnezzar, which was Saddam Hussein. As a matter of fact, Saddam Hussein said he was the third Nebuchadnezzar, and he started rebuilding parts of Babylon at the time. Some people believe that he had access to a Stargate in that area as part of the reason why the Iraq War was started. It wasn't just over oil. It was because we wanted to get access to this Stargate, to these things that Saddam Hussein had access to at the time. But here's what's very interesting. He used to push a lot of propaganda. He had posters where it would show himself next to King Nebuchadnezzar. He was calling himself that. But he released, guess what? A commemorative coin in 1987 that featured himself side by side with the Babylonian king. And it was not for currency, but it was a metal medallion, gold-colored coating on it. And it had all these cuneiform inscriptions on it. So it was to mimic these ancient artifacts. He put this out in 1987. So it's kind of interesting, at this meeting, we're told that Trump is supposedly going to be this mirror image of Nebuchadnezzar. And then they follow it with, well, he's putting out a coin with this UFO in the back. And it just made me think of this very parallel road that Saddam Hussein was running, also with a lot of weird stuff that he supposedly had access to, which was like ancient technology.
Yeah, that's wild. I didn't know that, man. I had no idea that Saddam thought he was the third Nebuchadnezzar, right?
The third, yeah.
So who was the second?
So Nebuchadnezzar II is generally the one that we always talk about, the one with Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the one that goes crazy, turns into like a werewolf for 7 years and then comes back. That's that one, right?
Werewolves aren't real, Joel, just so you know.
Right. So true. But yeah, so that's generally who people talk about. Neither of them were great, but Nebuchadnezzar II was an odd one, right? Because he had these conflicting inner battles between following the one true God, who he knew was real and consistently showed himself to him through Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But he would seem to always kind of fall back to these gods and get in trouble with these gods. And Saddam Hussein essentially worshiped the idea of Nebuchadnezzar, both of them, and said he was the next one. But he was actually trying to rebuild on the site of ancient Babylon, which many people think that the Iraq War was not really over oil so much as the George Bush Sr. They were trying to go over there and get access to whatever Saddam had access to.
Sorry, my sarcastic bone's kicking in. I'm like, what? No, that's, yeah. And so I don't know that, I haven't looked into this. I just thought of this question now. I wonder, is it a common thing for presidents to come out with commemorative coins depicting themselves? Do you know?
They can, yeah. I mean, there have been many that have. I'm, I guess, looking at what they're saying is going to be coupled with it. So to me, it's like he is the purveyor or the one who's bringing the NHIs or UFOs to us. Very similar to what Saddam did when he was showing himself to be this new Nebuchadnezzar. A lot of these commemorative coins don't have a lot of this weird stuff along with it. I guess that was where I was finding the parallel with them at the meeting telling us that Trump was going to be this new version of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah, man, super wild. And then he starts moving into UAPs, right? Kind of the first identifiable ones he talks about in 1930s was where UFOs or UAPs started surfacing in the sense of government reverse engineering. And that's kind of when the Nazi Party first starts really taking hold. They were the second largest party at the time. And this is prior to Hitler coming in there. But not long after that, we've got what happens with the Foo Fighters that show up in the 1940s during World War II, which, man, have you seen some of those pictures of the Foo Fighters? I mean, they look just like some of the weird UFOs that we've seen today. And what was interesting was a lot of the fighter planes and fighter pilots back then, they believed that they were of government creations. They didn't think anything about necessarily aliens or some sort of NHI, which they weren't even using that verbiage back then, but they viewed it as some sort of reverse engineered technology that the Nazis had or other governments had during the time. Now, there could have been an integrating of both, right? You could have had a mixture of both. And I tend to kind of lend towards what they told us in that meeting, 10% fallen angel or Elohim technology from another realm, and then 90% of it coming from governments all around the world, which I believe all of these major governments have had access to this technology, from China to Russia, Germany, the UK, us, even Canada. I think everybody's got some version of this technology. And I think that was a big part, and he brings this up, of why during Operation Paperclip that we brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists and engineers to come over and work for us, because I don't think it was just about the things that we could use for the CIA, like MK Ultra and some of the mind altering things, which we obviously did. But there's a big part of it because, you had Werner von Braun come over, you had Arthur Rudolph, some of these guys who helped facilitate the beginnings of NASA and rocketry and push it forward to a whole nother level. I think they were in contact with a lot of these entities back then. I mean, think about it. The swastika itself, even though it was bogarted by the Nazis, that symbol has been around for 6,000, 7,000 years, some odd, right? It started in Sanskrit. It's trickled down through Buddhism. And more recently, you see it show up in Theosophy with Helena Blavatsky and part of their symbolism. Even what's now gotten huge again is Raelianism, this idea that the Elohim were, guess what, aliens that created us, and Yahweh was an alien that created us. Even in the middle of their symbol is a swastika. So it ties right into this idea that the Nazis were obsessed with the occult and were obsessed with finding this connection to the spiritual realm. And for them to have gotten access to it, be able to reverse engineer it, kind of being the first to do it. And then we go in, we take hold of their operations, bring them in with Operation Paperclip. And then that coupled with everything that goes down in 1947 with Roswell and all these other interactions we have with these I'll say entities, that technology skyrockets for us at this point. And he brings all of this up in this meeting. He talks about the Vril Society. He talks about the idea that they're manipulating matter, and all of this trickles through the Thule Society right into the Nazis. And he brings all this up in the meeting. And I think this is where I started getting a little more excited, because I'm like, oh, this is my bag right here. This is where we're at. But this is definitely something that is important to understand, that we didn't just get this information from these entities per se. We were getting a lot of it from Germany. And when we brought those guys over here, they helped facilitate our expansion into technology.
Do you think that Germany, the scientists that were brought over, that worked for us or whatever to give us this boost in technology, the original source coming from occultic practices?
Absolutely, man. So he brings up the Vril Society and the Thule Society, which I've done a whole lot of research on. And really, the idea of the Vril Society, it shows up in a book called The Coming Race by Edward Bulwer Lytton. And what's interesting is he doesn't have any overt connections to the occult, but then later on, Helena Blavatsky comes out and says that, no, actually he was a Rosicrucian. And this idea of the Vril force is an actual existing universal life force that you can manipulate and you can create with. And when you go back and read his book, it kind of reads more like a nonfiction book, even though it's fiction. So what a lot of these occultists would do for centuries, right, to stay out of trouble with governments and whatever the ruling religious body was, they would write in fiction. So only the adepts, only the initiates would understand that what they were writing was actually truth. Aleister Crowley did it a lot, Jack Parsons. All of these guys would write fictionalized short stories or fictionalized books, but only the people who were involved in these occult practices would understand that, oh, if I read between the lines of the Twilight language or these occult blinds, I understand what the true meaning is. And this is exactly what Helena Blavatsky said later on when she was talking about this book, The Coming Race, because this Vril, it was this energy that these Vril would manipulate, and they had all of these powers like telepathic powers, and they could manipulate matter. And guess what these Vril looked like, Tony? They had wings, they had long blonde hair, and they were tall, and they lived in the earth. So it's like we're at this whole Elohim angel thing again, and this is exactly what these guys were talking about. But yeah, this Vril funnels into the Thule Society, which the Thule Society is actually an on-the-book society that guys like Rudolf Hess and Alfred Rosenberg and guys that were high up the chain as a part of Nazi Germany that were working very closely with Adolf Hitler had helped create. And the idea is that the Vril Society just moved into the Thule Society, and this is what they were using, was all of these occult practices to get in contact with these entities who would help them build or reverse engineer the craft that we now see. Because listen, back to what he said in the meeting, I tend to believe that the majority of what we see is probably government operated, whatever government you want to talk about, right? Or whatever country you want to talk about. But I do think there is that smaller percentage where you see things that is actually operated by some sort of entity or something from another realm.
Yeah, I mean, people there. It's well documented that people have called in lights in the sky. If you want to just leave it at the most basic level, there's been documentation of people being able to use, for lack of better terminology, psionics to call in these beings, entities, or crafts in the sky. And it's not exactly the same, but I remember my first interaction with this kind of idea, and it was probably 2018, 2019. I can't remember the guy's name. I think he was a guest on my show at one point early on, but I remember him sending me a video of his ability to manipulate things in front of him with, I think he was speaking it out loud. And I found it impressive. At the time, I was like, wow, that's. I mean, maybe it's a coincidence, but it's hard to time it and fake it. He was standing outside, and he started demanding. I think it was demanding, like verbally, a cloud to dissipate in front of you, and he filmed it. Like, I mean, it was a. I remember it was a blue sky, and it was like one of these faint clouds, and he's filming it, and he just starts doing his thing, and within like a minute or two, it was gone. It was like you couldn't even see it, and so like the idea of people using psionic ability or telepathy or whatever you'd want to call it to do things, it's not anything new. And there have been plenty of documentation of people calling these things in, which tells you there's a consciousness of what's coming, what's responding. There's an actual consciousness to it. And my pump the brakes is right there. It's like, well, what is this? You know, what are we talking to? And that's where it comes to testing the spirits for me. Are you of God or are you not of God? And what side are you on, kind of thing. And so that's kind of where I land on these kind of things. But it's definitely not anything new. This is something that people have been documenting.
Let me ask you this. To go back to the trafficking angle with children, what are your thoughts on the children? And from all indications from the meeting that it's a smaller group, right, that are chosen for this psionics program, because the way that he stated it in the meeting was that when they're spotted out for these abilities, that they're brought before the entities, that they're trained with the entities to be able to operate in this manner. So do you think this operates a lot like, you know, obviously soft disclosure, like Stranger Things, where they kind of spot this out and they bring them in and put them through probably MK Ultra type training to be able to do this stuff? You know, what's the end game for training these children with these entities to be able to do what exactly, right? We know that they can call them in, but I mean, listen, if they're training with them, I'm sure that the operation goes far deeper than just something like that.
Yeah, I imagine you're right. I imagine that it's not just to call in crafts. I don't think that's the only interest there. And the idea of the entity angle being manifested and present, to me, that's not anything new as far as my understandings go on things. In fact, even take it away from this for a second, within the pornography industry, there are plenty of people who will tell you that during the filming of these acting sessions, there are manifestations of demonic entities present. During the human trafficking that these children go through, where they're kidnapped or whatever, and they're being brainwashed. Essentially, they used to have different tactics, but now children are claiming that when they're saved, that part of their abuse was in every room that they were in. Say it's a house, every room has pornography playing, and there's a spiritual element to that where these demonic entities are manifesting through. And so the idea that the entities are manifested and involved in this manipulation, for me, it's like, yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. And you and I both know Fringe, who would back that kind of claim up too. I mean, she's had some wild experiences and unfortunately ongoing experiences, and she would probably tell you the same thing, that there is an element where there is a co-laboring of sorts between human and entity to establish an abuse pipeline.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us into the other part where he brings up specifically Mesopotamian deities that were being encountered currently by the governments and by these special operations that are working with these children. And he brings up two names in particular. He brings up Baal and Ishtar. Now, Baal we're pretty familiar with because of, you know, the sacrificing children to Baal. I know Moloch's brought into that too, but Baal's a big one. The storm god, right? The fertility god. You need something, you sacrifice something for it, and then he gives you what you're looking for. Ishtar's an interesting one though, because she's tied into the Queen of Heaven, which we hear about in the Bible, and she goes by many names: Inanna, Aphrodite, Isis, Venus. I mean, the list goes on with how many names that she can go by, right? But she is also one of these main deities that is in contact with these governments. And another thing I've been screaming from the rooftops for a while now is this divine feminine entity that seems to be really rearing its head over the past, 10, 20 years. And not to say this entity hasn't always been there, but it just seems like people are way more susceptible to it than ever before, this feminine goddess. And it's funny, he pairs a very masculine god and a feminine goddess as the two that are meeting with these governments, which kind of plays into the bringing together the polarities, which a lot of occultists talk about doing. It's bringing the yin and yang together. It's bringing the order. It's creating the order, right? And it's trying to mimic God, right, in a sense, because God is order. So what they try to do is create a false order. And what they're trying to do is bring this male and this female aspect together. And when he talked about those specific gods coming to governments, presenting themselves as themselves, man, I think that's super interesting too, because they're not even presenting themselves as these extraterrestrials, not to these upper elites. They are presenting themselves as these gods, as these goddesses, and they are requiring worship. And I think this is the piece that we need to be real careful about. And we're looking at all this NHI stuff. It just seems to funnel back into something negative, right? I'm not here to scream that everything's a demon by any stretch, because I think the spiritual world is super complex. But what I can say is, though, I'm hard pressed to find anything good out of this, Tony.
Yeah, no, that final word that you just said is how I feel. And I say err on the side of caution. And it comes down to people's basic fundamental beliefs, and what do you believe, right? So I say, for me, I believe in Jesus Christ as my ultimate savior in life. And so I rest in that, and I err on the side of caution for a lot of other things. The idea of this female entity, you're right, it goes back a long time. I mean, the miracle of Fatima is part of this, and there's these waves, and you even see it in Exodus. Not plainly, it doesn't say it in Exodus, but when you look at the history of things, when the Israelites were in captivity and they were walking, and they were escorted out by God of slavery, they went into the wilderness, and they wind up at the Sinai Peninsula. And in that area, the Israelites were very familiar with before they were free, because through probably hundreds of years, they were slaves in Egypt, and they were brought to that very location to mine. I think it was turquoise. I think it was turquoise mining. And through geological discoveries, they have found I don't remember the name exactly of the temple, but they have found remnants of a temple that was dedicated to the goddess Hathor. And when they would escort the Israelites through the wilderness to these mines, they would also bring the Egyptian priests, and they erected these temples, and the slaves, these are the gods they worship, because these are the gods that Egypt worshipped. And so when you see how things kind of play out in Exodus, they were very familiar with certain gods and goddesses. And when you see them have a golden calf and the symbology there, there's a lot of reason to believe that when they rebelled against God, the Elohim God, and reverted back into little g God worship, they were actually reverting back to, at least one of them was Hathor worship. And in this area, you'll find a lot of remnants and symbology of Hathor, which is an ancient Egyptian goddess. And you see that coming back full circle to today. And it's not, these are not new tactics of the enemy. It is new generations being exposed and introduced to old tactics. And I think even with Ishtar, don't quote me on this, but I think there are connections. You might probably do know more than I would. Ishtar, there's connections to Ishtar to Lilith, and Lilith is an entity that we constantly deal with in this country. There's a lot of people that, especially in the Appalachia region, stemming from Pennsylvania down into North Georgia, there's a lot of people that deal with female entities that either they worship or are tormented by. Our friend Ward did a fantastic docuseries called Dark Holler, documenting a woman's journey where it started at her baptism. She gave her life to Jesus Christ. She's in a baptism in a river. She's getting baptized. And her pastor and the people who were there, in fact, if I remember correctly, Josh, the pastor, during the baptism, he calls Ward afterwards. And I think he said, I think I accidentally had an exorcism during a baptism. And when Ward uncovers this whole, I haven't watched a documentary in a while, but when he uncovers this whole thing, there's this connection to this Lilith entity. And that entity is deeply rooted throughout this Appalachia region to these old communities have been around a very long time. And it's like normal to them. It's just what it is. And so again, this female entity and deity has been operating in the shadows for a very long time. And the people who have given themselves over to darkness would not have any problem working with dark entities to achieve their humanistic desires and goals.
100%. And you're definitely not wrong when it comes to Ishtar being tied into Lilith and Inanna as well. Because if you look at some of the early depictions of this goddess, it's got owl's feet, very much similar to what we hear about people when they have these Lilith interactions. It's got wings, and in this particular engraving, there are two owls on either side of it. And when you type in engravings of Lilith, this comes up, the same one. So it's the same goddess. It's the exact same goddess. Now, I would argue, and I think you would as well, because we've talked about this, that a lot of times these Elohim, these negative Elohim, right? These gods and goddesses, that they have other gods and goddesses that are lower tier that work for them, and they'll kind of go by the same name. So they'll operate under the same umbrella. And I think Lilith is one of these ones, this divine feminine aspect that is, postulating as a good thing in UFO circles right now, who's telling people that she is here to help us, that actually she's also leading people astray. Well, is leading people astray in that aspect, but also attacking people in a very negative manner too on the opposite end.
Yeah, I would say that let me take an opportunity here to paint just an idea that we are experiencing, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, competing kingdoms. You brought the word kingdom up, and there are two warring kingdoms that have been warring since before you and I were born, and it is layered. And when you talk about kingdoms, you're talking about a structure. Often we think about evil being a bad guy, or that goblin that seems to pop up everywhere. We're talking about warring kingdoms, and in kingdoms there's structure, there's organization, there are hierarchies, and there are rebellions within kingdoms. We see that in the book of Revelation. Literally, God had a kingdom, and part of his kingdom rebelled against him. A third of his kingdom rebelled, and fractured, and that's what I'm talking about. And so, what we're experiencing here is this rebelling. And within that, you talked about the idea of, I can't regurgitate the way you did, but I'll take it into a more localized, personal depiction. So I'm relatively new to the idea of deliverance, and I've been really talking a lot about it recently with people on my platform and trying to understand it. And we actually, no shameless plug, but it is what it is. Just this past Tuesday, I came out with an episode that deeply impactful for me with Mr. Mike Brewer, and he has extensive knowledge in this. And through talking with people, I see this idea of this is just me. This is just me trying to put it into words of like almost like an inward hierarchy and kingdom when people have demonic possession in their life, and you see it in I always mess it up. It's either Matthew or Mark 4 or Mark 5. The demoniac man, I think, is Mark 5, and in Matthew, but I always go back to Mark 5. The whole legion thing. The legion wasn't just like a name; it was a descriptor. But we're talking 1,000 or more demons in one man. Well, when that happens, there is a hierarchy. They're not just in there hanging out, they're all equals. There's a hierarchy. And one of the common things that I've been learning through people who have deliverance ministries is when this is being evicted out of somebody, at times the higher entity, or maybe more powerful entity, will push forward other entities in its place to keep itself hidden in location. And so with what you were talking about and Lilith, I view it almost in a similar light, where it's like it may not be the entity, but there are other entities being pushed forward in its place. I think there's a real structure to the evil and darkness that we experience in this world, what we're talking about. And it's not a just simple, good team, bad team, like an elementary school field day where you have, the white team and blue team. That's the way it was when I was in school 100 years ago. You had the blue team and the white team, and that's that. It's like it is a layered thing. And I've documented that. I've uncovered that through people's experiences that I am 99.99% sure I have been able to prove to be real, where there is a warring kingdom. And not only is there a kingdom of darkness, but within that kingdom of darkness, I believe there are warring entities with one another. They compete with one another. They have the same enemy. Their enemy is Christ. Their enemy is God. And at the end of the day, we will attack what we have to attack to try pulling God's agenda down. That's their perspective. But within that, when you have entities, beings, fallen angels who were so prideful that they thought that they could actually overcome their creator, that pride doesn't just stop with the creator. That pride is inward, and they do hold their own pride amongst each other. And I imagine this is the Tony version of it. They look at each other and they think that I'm better than you. And I'm not better than him, but I'm definitely better than you. And there's this competing factor, which we've uncovered within, my documentation of certain things.
Completely agree with you. And it even plays into culturally how we look at different nations prior in the past and all the way to now, and how that they talk about the gods and how the gods can even lose their place, so that, one god may outcompete another god and take a more of a an upper tier role to that god, and this infighting that goes on. Completely agree with that. And it kind of brings us to this next part that he talked about. And we briefly touched on it probably twice now in this episode. And I want to give my thoughts on it, and then I want to ask your thoughts on it, because you and I have talked about this before, but it'd probably be good for people to hear. But the idea of this 90% being our technology, but this 10% being this fallen angel tech. Now, I know a lot of people have a tough time at that. They have a tough time marrying the physical world with the spiritual world and other realms, because to them, the spiritual world means ethereal or etheric, and it's not. Like, at the end of the day, specifically when we look at what these occultists have been able to conjure, have been able to connect with, and we'll talk a little bit about that when I jump to the Jake Barber part that was brought up in the meeting. But we can look to Enoch 8 specifically, where it talks about all of these different fallen angels, from Azazel to Simjaza to Kokabel. We've got Barakael, and they're teaching all of these things, but they're all very physical things that they're teaching people, that they're bringing to people. They're bringing this technology to man. And if we look at even more modernized times where we're seeing what? Technology that we do not have is being brought to us by, and I'll put this in air quotes, crashes, which I think most of these crashes are by design. They want us to feel like that these extraterrestrials, spiraled out, had a crash, and then we just lucked up on some technology, which I think it's all coordinated. But I believe that it is absolutely viable to say that the two can coexist at the same time. This idea that the spiritual and the physical cannot be the same, to me, is ludicrous when we're looking at the Bible, when we're looking at the book of Enoch, when we're looking at all of these alchemical texts that have been talked about since long before Jesus came to this earth. We're talking about thousands of years BC. We see this consistently. I just want to know your thoughts on it. And I know kind of where you're going to go with it, but I think it's important for people to hear this because it gets lost in the sauce, so to speak, that the two can't be the same. And I believe it is the same. And I believe that the technology that we're reverse engineering is not from here. It is created somewhere else. It's brought here, but it is physical. It is tangible, and we can manipulate it just like anything here on Earth.
Yeah, man. I always have a hard time even putting into words what is in my gut about this particular topic. Well, a lot of topics, but this one particularly. And let me start off with this. So and maybe not everybody even is on this page, but I and you believe demonic entities are real, and they do manifest into this realm. People have seen them. And not only have they seen them, they have been marked by them. These entities will attack people and mark them physically. I have seen the pictures of scratches, and many people have as well. And unless you're somebody who is saying, yeah, that's fake, they made it up or something like that, okay. But there is plenty of people out there who will tell you that not only did they have a creepy feeling, not only did they have a scared feeling, that something manifested in front of them that they laid their eyes on, and it either tried to manipulate them, it attacked them, or it maybe stood there and looked at them just to terrify them. But there's always these underlying agendas through these attacks. Sometimes the attack doesn't have to be physical; it can be psychological. What will my manifestation do to this person? And at the end of the day, how can that accomplish my agenda of driving a wedge between them and Christ? And so there's a lot of reasons for this. But if you take that idea and you're like, okay, yeah, I believe that demons manifest and that they at times attack people and they leave a scratch on somebody's back is a common thing that people talk about. Well, if that's possible, there along the line, logistically, somewhere, there was a physical manifestation to the point that there was an ability to leave scratches. Unless you want to go down the route that that person's demonically possessed and the scratches manifested from under their skin from inside because the demon is in them, you could probably make an argument for that. But in every case, maybe somewhere along the line, there was an actual physical manifestation of something that does not originate from this plane of existence always, coming here and manifesting in a physical way that we can exist in to create physical harm to us. So if you just take that basic concept, and let me say this. So one, and I don't have, I don't have a theological degree. And so what I'm about to say, just take it as it is. But I view what happened in the garden, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because I know it is a rabbit hole, but there was a level of eviction that happened when sin entered the world. And I do question and I wonder what man's level of existence was before sin entered the equation. And I wonder if there was something taken away from us, or we were handcuffed in something with an ability to exist in a way that we can't anymore because of the curse of sin. And there's plenty of reasons for that, but could it be that, in a sense, our physical containment that we have here is like almost a prison cell, where other beings and entities aren't bound like we are because of the curse of sin? That's just a theory that I bang around at times. But if you look at if you look at this, I have, let's just say I have a 2005 Honda Accord, and my Honda Accord 2005 has 2 doors, and those doors, they open. And then, Joel, you have, and I would never suggest that you would buy a Tesla, but maybe you have a Tesla, and it's a 2026 Tesla, some model, and you have doors too, and they open too, but your doors open up, and your car does things that my car doesn't do. They're both cars. They're both things that theoretically do similar stuff, but yours is way more advanced and it does way cooler stuff. I kind of look at that in a similar way, where it's just like there are beings that have the ability to manifest and become present in this realm, when the beings here, us, mankind, do not have that ability to do other things in other realms naturally. There are other ways to go about it that are not natural to God's order. And so in this realm, in this other plane of existence, I'm just rambling now. I'm like, where am I going? In this other plane of existence, I have come to understand that it is active, it is operating, there's warfare going on there, it is very tangible. And just because we can't physically, in our understanding, go there naturally, doesn't mean that what we experience as physical here can't be happening there. And these beings, they're clearly bringing stuff here. And I even mentioned it real quick. I even mentioned it in the beginning of this conversation, that rendering, that artistic rendering of what the government or FBI, some organization investigated a case where multiple witnesses watched a bronze metallic shaped craft manifest out of a flash of light. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, man. And completely agree with everything you said there, because that's where my mind always goes with this stuff. And they kind of shift us into it, and it's a way to make it make sense, specifically when it comes to alchemy and occult practices. And he brought up Jake Barber. Now, obviously, he brought up Jake Barber in conjunction with the trafficking of gifted children, which he called psionics. This is kind of when psionics really got hot in 2025 and people really started talking about it in that specific way. And he started talking about different interactions, obviously, with these UFOs, UAPs. Now, the one that always comes up is the exotic craft that they were trying to recover, the one that was the egg-shaped, and it had these weird hieroglyphics on it. And I know people have probably seen the video. A lot of people think it's fake. Some people think it's real. But the idea of the egg shape is a very, very occult symbol. And one of the first times that it's brought up in the modern vernacular was with Aleister Crowley and Roddy Minor when they go into the astral, where Roddy does in the initial astral meeting with this wizard Amalantra during the Amalantra workings in 1918. And when she meets this wizard Amalantra, he says it's all in the egg. Now, it makes Crowley think about a prior interaction he has with an entity in 1909 with this entity called Abeldiz. And Abeldiz points to this set of palm trees, and there's this egg under the palm trees. So Crowley has a lot of ideas about what he thinks this egg is, and he believes it to be connected to the idea of astral travel, which also comes out during these Amalantra workings when he meets with this entity called Lamb. Now, Lamb connects directly to the meetings we have because the person that is giving us this presentation talks specifically to Crowley, talks specifically to Lamb, says that Lamb was really the first modern depiction of what these entities are that are brokering deals with mankind. But the idea of this egg being this version of travel, it plays out even further on, though, because when we start looking at Kenneth Grant, he was a ceremonial magician that comes along later on, and he takes the Ordo Templi Orientis and moves it into what he calls the Typhonian order, or the Typhonian version of the OTO. And he also was a student of Crowley. Matter of fact, he begs Crowley for the picture of Lamb. He's obsessed with it to the point that Crowley puts him through a series of tests. And he doesn't quite pass him, but Crowley gives him the picture anyway. So he creates, and I believe you and I have talked about it a little bit, but not too much in depth, this cult of Lamb that he creates out of it. And part of this cult of Lamb, they use this picture of Lamb and they go into the picture and they connect with this entity. Now, Ayahuasca is also part of this. Now, Ayahuasca was the holy guardian angel of Crowley, which is a separate entity to this Lamb, which is interesting because the holy guardian angel, which we would consider to be a fallen angel or fallen Elohim, was really the director of Crowley's entire life. Lamb's another entity that just shows up. He meets with several different types, but it's funny how this gray alien is different, separate from this entity Ayahuasca. Now, what's interesting about Kenneth Grant, he writes this statement called the Lamb Statement. Now, in the early part of it, he talks about how to enter the astral realm. Part of that, check this out now, is entering the egg and merging within by looking into the entity's eyes. You have to look into Lamb's eyes, and then you can enter the egg, and then you can transverse the universe. You can transverse other realms by doing so. He goes even further to talk about how the egg is an astral space capsule for traveling to Lamb's domain, or for exploring extraterrestrial spaces, in a sense in which the OTO, and he calls them tantric time travelers, are exploring the tunnels of, check this out now, Set, the god Set, in intracosmic and Chthonian capsules. Now, Chthonian means spirits of the underworld in Greek. So here we have this egg that Jake Barber is talking about that they're trying to retrieve. Let me ask you a question, Tony. It's physical, right? They're trying to retrieve it. These UFOs that people have seen that are egg-shaped, people have been in contact with, they're physical, you can touch them. But clearly, these occultists also know that these vehicles are used for astral travel and can be summoned through entities like Lamb, specifically through this Lamb statement. So I think this is a prime example of that missing piece I was talking about at the beginning of this, that occult piece, that 1/3 piece that's been talked about for centuries in occultic practices and all of these different mystery cults and magic cults throughout the years. It's right there. It's right there, but most people don't know about it, or they discard it as being fake, when the actuality is these guys have been doing it for a long time. The government's just caught up with it, which actually, I don't even think they just caught up with it. I think the governments have known about this for centuries, but I think maybe more modern governments are finding a way to connect to it and then reverse engineer it. And I think this egg is no different. I think it operates in a realm of existence and was created in a realm of existence that we can't understand, but it is absolutely physical, and it's something that we can touch and move into and use.
Yeah, no, I what you just said about tying it all together, like that really does tie it all together. And for clarity purposes, I'd say, like, you're not saying that it's like a literal bird egg or something like that. We're talking like egg-shaped craft type thing. And when you just take the idea of the symbology of the egg, the shape of the egg, like, I mean, you could draw an egg and there's the symbology and the shape of what we're talking about. It does resemble a lot of the reports that people say they see in the sky. It really does. I mean, even loosely, the idea of a tic-tac UFO or people often the classic disc shape, which is in like more of an oval shape. You know, if you want to take the commercialized view away from it and you were just to carve the edges a little bit more rounded, it would be egg shaped. In fact, again, hate to keep bringing it up, but it's fresh in my mind. The artistic rendering on war.gov/UFO today, as of May 8th at 12:28 Eastern time, that we're recording right now, what we know to be on there right now, there's an artistic rendering of what you could say looks like an egg. I don't know if you saw the image yet, Joel, but
I did. Yeah, it's wild.
That looks egg-like. And so there is a real connection here. And I remember when I first started, I forget what it was that happened, but I remember I first started connecting these dots to the egg stuff. And I reached out to you and you're like, oh yeah. I was like, oh, this isn't new. Got it. I was like, finally, for the first time in my life, I'm breaking the story on something. I'm going to go viral. Apparently, I missed the mark on that one. And now I'm going viral for something I wasn't intending to go viral for. But
it's still fairly new to people, though, understanding the mystery cults and what they've known for a long time in conjunction with the more modern UFO movement or UAP movement. I think that when we look at a lot of these high-level alchemists that have been talking about this for a long time, they just use a different verbiage. So when you're looking these types of things up, you're not going to find it in a way that's in the modern vernacular. So it's tough sometimes to put those pieces together. And that being said, it's not everyone's job to be able to do that. And it's not everybody's calling to be able to do that either. And I think that that God lays out different things for each of us to do. And it just happens to be something that, one, I was involved with a long time ago in my non-Christian days. And then two, I just find a fascination with how it connects to the modern world, all of this idol worship and God worship and the technologies that were supposedly given by them to us. It doesn't sound much different to what's going on now. And even to look into the past a little bit during this meeting, he brought up something that I know we've heard about, that aliens have done, quote unquote, to people when they have abducted them. And I'm going to ask you what you think here in a second. But he brings up remote viewing from people within the government who viewed the crucifixion of Jesus and were able to see this crucifixion. Now, I would argue that they're probably not seeing the real thing, that they're probably seeing some sort of manifestation that's given by these negative entities. But it actually reminded me of something that was written about in a book called Behold a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper, who was, the groundbreaker when it came to conspiracy theories, and everybody knew who Bill Cooper was. As a matter of fact, Bill Cooper's death in 2001 is still one of the most mysterious things ever. He gets in a crazy gun shootout with these sheriff's deputies over him not paying his taxes, which is insane. But when you start looking at a lot of the stuff he was saying leading up to that, because he was specifically going after governments more heavily than he had in the past, then you can kind of see where maybe his death was probably manufactured and then they made it look like something else. But he talks about that high-level officials and aliens showed a hologram which showed the historical event of the crucifixion of Jesus, and they talk about how that they manipulated that they've helped create all of these religions, and that Jesus, him dying, he actually died. He didn't rise again. He's not the Son of God. He is not God in the flesh. This is a consistent theme. Now, I will say this, Tony. What I have noticed is the shift, right? People have become more aware of the spiritual world. We've kind of moved out of this atheistic thinking as a whole, whereas, you still got the humanists, right? You still have atheists, but I'm saying we're seeing more of a shift into spirituality because of all the weird stuff. Exactly. Culturally, we're seeing a shift. So they're trying to manage that now. So what we're seeing is a shift from extraterrestrials to what? Ultra-terrestrials. Now, what are these ultra-terrestrials telling us? Well, they're also telling us that we can ascend. We can be like them. A lot of Gnosticism that's brought into this too. And the idea that they helped create us, but they're doing it more of a spiritual manner now. It's not so much that, oh, it's a DNA thing, so much as this is a spiritual thing. We are gods. As far as your finite mind can understand, us Elohim are gods. And they're shifting that move towards that. And if in the meeting, like they said, that there are Mesopotamian gods that are presenting themselves as such, then there has to be high levels of black operations and elites that understand exactly what this is. They're not deceived. They're just on team evil and they're trying to take out team good. So again, I think like you that most of the people in governments, even levels up, aren't aware of exactly what this is. They may have more information than us, but they're looking at it as these are non-human intelligence or extraterrestrials, and we're dealing with something we don't quite understand, but they're not in the know of what these mystery cults are, the real mystery cults, the elites behind the scenes.
Well, the remote viewing side of this is interesting because like what you just presented an argument of a remote viewer not actually seeing the authentic crucifixion of Christ. And it reminds me that I've been feeling a strong, compelling desire to start gathering information that historically, biblically, in the Bible and extra canonical, like outside the Bible, historical writings, things like that, that prove the existence of Christ, that prove who he is, and prove that he did die and then resurrected under his own power. There is a substantial amount of evidence towards that, not just in the Bible. I would certainly use the Bible as a tool in that, but there is this desire of mine, and it's because of what you're saying. And then it takes me back to the Sean Ryan show that came out about, I don't know, 2 years ago or whatever, with Angela Ford. I think that was her name, the psychic, that he asked her specifically, have you ever remote viewed the crucifixion? And she bugged out, bro. Like people even said that like it looked like her demons were manifesting or something. Like she was not ready to talk about it. And it makes you like wonder why, and I don't have an answer to that. Like I'm literally asking why, because you try to take it from her perspective, and maybe you don't have the full perspective as to what she even believes, but like based on what she believes to know to be true, remote viewing the crucifixion, what could have spawned that kind of physical reaction that she had, where she just shut down. She's just like shaking her head, almost like an innocent child would, and be like, no, I don't want to talk about this, and it's just, and he was just like, okay, we'll move on, kind of thing. But there is a real element to the remote viewing side of things that is well documented in documentation that the government has declassified and released. And similar to what you were just saying, there is this evolution of our culture right now, and part of me feels questions. Is it a designed evolution? Is there a push of us going in a certain direction spiritually by design? And what is the purpose and design behind that? But the government doesn't have to release documents that they don't want to release. They don't have to declassify anything they don't want to release. And so the fact that they declassify documentation that points people to the understanding that their own government gives a lot of credence and weight behind the spiritual aspects of our existence and trying to understand it and utilize it for their advantages, it does make you wonder why they are willing to put that out there. Some people might say, well, they have to because of Freedom of Information Act. The government doesn't have to do anything. They like daddy government owns us, so like
Right.
they don't have to do anything. And down to they'll do whatever they want, and they'll find ways around any rules and regulations to accomplish what they want to do. And so if they don't want to tell you something, they're not gonna. So there is always a reason why the information is coming out, why you have the ability to download an old CIA document that, declassifies certain things. It reminds me of a document that we were just talking about a few weeks ago. I think it was in 1983. I can't remember the name of the document, but within the document, the phraseology of homunculus came up. And it's like, whoa, hang on a second. Like, that shouldn't be in the CIA, right, guys? And they're like, oh, no, it is. And it's just like that.
Right.
It's like, whoa. And that's like a flash in the pan compared to some of the stuff that's been coming out in the past few years and stuff. So overall, there is a push to get the culture's consciousness geared towards a spiritual existence. And I do believe that is to be a controlled spiritual existence, a controlled understanding of our spiritual existence. And that is the danger in all of this stuff. The fact that we know our government is coming out with documentation, pointing us in certain directions of understanding that we are spiritual beings. And we don't want sinful man, steering that ship for the collective consciousness of our culture on how to understand our spiritual existence. And there's people who will say, well, Christians wouldn't be, juked out by that. Maybe not you, maybe not me, but there are a lot of people who believe that they're Christians, but are not strong and secure in their faith. Maybe they're going through a dry season, they're questioning things, and they're just in a weak spot, that this would come in and scoop them up. And that is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid a deception that could sweep people off their feet into a new plane of understanding of existence that fits what their mood is that day. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to, I'm putting a staple on that. We are spiritual beings. We have a spiritual existence. And there is an enemy that has been warring for our souls since we were born. Every day you wake up, there is a war going on around you, and the subject is you. And the whole point is to pull you away from Christ. And this stuff that we're talking about right now, this information that the government is releasing, whether it's the UFO documents to the CIA documents, is pushing you in a certain direction of understanding there is more to your reality than what they have let you know in the past. And why is it that they're coming out with it now? And you have to be on guard as to how they're trying to steer your consciousness through this process. And your only hope is to focus in on Christ. He is your compass, and he will guide you through this. But you have to be real about your relationship with Christ. You can't be fake about it. You have to get serious about it today.
I completely agree with you, man. And I think that's a good way to end this episode, because we touched on pretty much all the high points that were brought up. Obviously, he went into some other things that got kind of dense in some areas, but I think it was just a rehashing in a different way of other points that he had made. And I don't think we really need to go into those specifically, because I feel like that we have thoroughly gone through at least the presentation that he gave us for other people to now understand, in a more educated manner of what we heard. And what you just said just now wraps it up. They want us aware of a spiritual existence. And I want to say this. What I really enjoyed about the end of the presentation was there was a Bible verse that was stated, and I think this is why we do what we do. And this is, what the gentleman said that presented this to us. He actually quoted Ezekiel 3:18 through 19. If I say to the wicked man, you will surely die, but you do not warn him or speak out to warn him from his wicked way to save his life, that wicked man will die in his iniquity, and I will hold you responsible for his blood. But if you warn a wicked man, he does not turn from his wickedness and his wicked way, he will die in his iniquity, but you will have saved yourself. So I think the essence of it was we need to, as people who are aware, who are Christians, to help others by telling the truth. And that was the whole point of this episode, was for you and I to get on here and tell exactly what happened in this meeting. No reptilians, guys. Sorry, we couldn't give that to you, but we were able to expound upon what was said at the meeting. And listen, it's really no different than what Tony and I have been telling you guys from the get-go since we've started, right? Tony, a lot longer than me, but since I started podcasting, like, we've been saying this stuff for a long time. And honestly, in a way more outlandish manner, at least from the outside to some people. So I know
I'm a crazy boy.
Right. So honestly, the information that was given to us, at least to Tony and I, maybe a couple of the people in the room, wasn't that wild, because we've heard wilder. But maybe to some of the people in the room, that was, peeling their whole cat back. We're like, whoa, that's super wild. And I get how the rumblings of a meeting with pastors and podcasters and with quote unquote government, which it was not, and we're here to tell you again, it was not the government. When that comes out, that a myriad of different ideas start spawning from it, from all kinds of different talking heads. And they all have ideas about why were these people invited, or why was the government involved with this? And, there's a lot that spawned out with the fact that they think that Christianity is being used as a tool to trick people, specifically from non-Christians, and how that these gentlemen that were a part of this are being used as either useful idiots or a part of an operation. And I can understand how, from the outside looking in, when you see the absolute mayhem that exploded online, how it's tough to really understand what happened. But we're hoping that Tony and I today were able to really break this down and let you understand that, one, it wasn't what you thought it was, and two, here is the information that came out of it, but it's not information that you don't already know. But at least maybe we could expound on it a little bit better today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, man. I think you nailed it. We just I try to be as transparent as possible, and this was not on my radar for this week. I was not planning on talking about any of this stuff. I was, in all honesty, yesterday, or for my live show yesterday, I was planning on talking about weird things in the Smoky Mountains, and so that kind of just got blown out of the water. But we're here to tell you that Christ is King. He rules all, and your faith must be in Him in order to experience eternal salvation.
Completely agree with you, man. Guys, we love you joining us today, and I'm hoping that this episode will help get the word out about what really went down at this quote-unquote secret meeting. And we both love you to death, and we're praying for you just as much as we hope you're praying for us, and we'll see you next time.
I'm trying to be me, but every time I do, they point their fingers at me. Sometimes I wanna scream, I can't fit within their kaleidoscope of what they want me to believe. But I can't fade to black, but I can't fade to black. It's all in the gray, scales can't balance the way, colors bleed out the fray, black and white on the side. It's all in the gray, scales can't balance the way, colors bleed out the fray, black and white on the side. I don't know if I lie to myself every time I say my family's on my mind. That don't mean I don't care. It's just sometimes I feel stretched thin, and I know that isn't fair. But I can't